My guest this week is Craig Finn. Finn is a Minnesota-bred singer-songwriter based in New York City, best known as the singer of the Hold Steady. Finn spent the 90s leading Minneapolis indie band Lifter Puller, which released 3 albums and an EP, before relocating to New York, where he joined Lifter Puller member Tab Kubler to form the Hold Steady in 2003. The Hold Steady quickly achieved critical acclaim and a worldwide fan base with their unique pairing of dense lyrical narratives with big rock guitars. The Hold Steady have released 9 LPs, including The Price of Progress in 2023, and Finn has released 6 solo albums, including the most recent, A Legacy of Rentals. Finn also hosts a podcast called That's How I Remember It, where each episode features a conversation between him and another creative person about memory and the way it affects the stories they tell others and themselves. Pitchfork has described Finn as a born storyteller who has chosen rock as his medium. And it is my great pleasure to welcome the Revolutions Per Movie, Craig Finn. Hey, Craig.
Hey, what's up, Chris? How are you?
I am so great because you picked Rock and Roll High School.
I am, I not only picked it, I rewatched it last night. So it's fresh in my mind. And I had a lot of memories about why it's important to me, and was able to kind of at least think through why I think it's made such a lasting impression on me.
Yeah, it's incredible. So when did you discover the Ramones, and where did this film slot in with your history with the Ramones?
I actually remember the Ramones when I was pretty young, like let's say 3rd or 4th grade. My school, my elementary school, had a subscription to Thrasher magazine in the library. Yeah, and so we'd go and kind of fight over it. And I always really liked the music coverage. And so I remember seeing the Ramones in there and being sort of enthralled, but I didn't know what they sounded like. And I didn't have like older brothers or sisters. You know, I have a younger sister only, but so I didn't have like a great pathway. So all my music knowledge when I was a kid was all just following scraps of information, you know, however I could get them. And I remember actually, I'm pretty sure, and maybe I'm making this up, but I also think that not that long after that actually there was an article about the Ramones in Time magazine, which came to my parents' house. And it was, and so I read about it there, but I still didn't really hear them. And then I do know actually. So remember there was those KTEL records at the end of the year, they would come out and they would say, you know, Chartbuster 78 or something. And it would be all the hits.
20 classic chart toppers.
Yeah. So there's this, my friend's older brother, my friend Greg Knesny, his older brother Ron, got one of those, which is, I really want to buy a copy of this record. It's called Rock 80. I don't know, maybe you're familiar with it.
I don't remember Rock 80, no. I had a lot of the KTEL novelty ones, like Looney Tunes, Funky Favorites. But for some reason, I never got those end of the year sum-ups, the summaries.
Well, they're kind of for, I mean, when I look back, they're kind of for music, like people who don't really love music or something, you know. I'm looking about. I'm wondering if I could find her. Okay. So check this out. Here's the Rock 80 track list. It was like new music hits. So it was kind of, you know, oriented towards a different type of listener. We got Cars by Gary Newman, Brass in Pocket by the Pretenders, Driver's Seat, Sniffing the Tears, Cruel to Be Kind, Nick Lowe, Is She Really Going Out with Him, Joe Jackson, Heartbreaker, Pat Benatar, Call Me Blondie, Do You Remember Rock and Roll Radio by the Ramones, My Sharona, I Want You to Want Me, Hold On by Ian Gaume, I don't know that song, or at least I don't know it by name, One Way or Another, We Live for Love by Pat Benatar, and Pop Music by M. So pretty great record.
That is, I mean, 1980 was a solid AM radio summer for me. I remember Cars, Gary Newman, Blondie, Cheap Trick, DEVO. No Ramones on the radio for me, though.
I don't remember it. You know, I think for me, and so in 1980, I was when the new year, I was in 3rd grade. So I graduated 89. So it was about 4th grade when I heard this record. And, a lot of these songs were new to me when I heard them. They were not on classic rock radio I heard. So that was, I guess, my first time I remember hearing the Ramones, and I loved it. Like I thought it
Yeah,
was like the greatest song. And but I probably didn't have a Ramones album for another year or two. Um and the first one I got was End of the Century because I thought it had that song, you know.
sure.
But what I they really like I didn't classify them necessarily. They were a rock band to me, you know.
Yeah.
In 19 at the end of sixth grade, I saw STYX live in concert. It with the KILROY Was Here tour, and
Oh,
I loved
amazing.
that. I loved that, and I love the Ramones too. Like it was
Okay, we're
just
going to
like,
stop talking about the Ramones. We're going to talk about Kilroy Was Here, the film. You saw the stage show, that whole Kilroy thing?
yeah, if I remember right, it
Wow.
started as a movie and
It does.
then it went to like a stage show, like a play, and then
Yes.
it became a concert, and then it definitely had an intermission. On my own
Oh,
podcast, I was just talking to Tom Sharpling about this, and it a young lady next to me who I thought was particularly beautiful. She drank a bottle of peppermint schnapps during the first part of the show, and at intermission, she was carried out by paramedics. And I remember thinking, like, this is the greatest thing I've ever been a part of.
oh, absolutely. Yeah, when I saw Devo in 80, my parents bought us tickets but sat in the balcony,
Mhm.
and they bought tickets for my cousins too. And I remember the person in front of us vomiting, and I remember my cousins who were like super Christian. Like I just remember seeing Devo through their eyes at a young age. I was already like, I was just like, oh, I feel so uncomfortable. But yeah, but it was also kind of incredible, and it was kind of the gateway for me.
Do you think, like, here's the one thing I've always wondered is that I felt like when I was at the STYX concert in sixth grade that there were some people that were really into STYX, and there are also some people that were just into rock concerts. Like, I wonder if the 70s and 80s might have had more of like, I mean, ticket prices were probably lower. I don't know if they were lower comparable, but I wondered if it was like just let's just go to that thing and it's a kind of a freedom scene, you know, and maybe the headliner mattered a little less.
Yeah, I think so. In Portland, there was a radio station called KGUN, and they were 92 point FM. They played none of this music, but they would have a Catch a Rising Star show for $1.92. Tom
Mhm.
Petty with the Ramones,
Wow.
Patti Smith, The Police with XTC, $1.92. And so people would just take a chance, I think, to kind of see a bit of like, I don't know, let's go see the freak show. But the Sticks thing, I think it was just so cultural. Like you wanted to go see these bands, it was like, oh,
Mhm.
Styx is coming through, of course. I think people were still kind of listening to a little of everything at this point and being less selective.
Well, without the internet, it was harder to get your fill of an artist, probably
Yeah.
too. And I think the idea that like Dennis DeYoung he was somewhere here in St. Paul,
Yeah.
you know, like today he walks among us,
Yes.
and you know, tonight we know exactly where he is. But it's kind of exciting to even know that Tommy Shaw might be getting coffee in the Twin Cities.
Totally. So when did you see the film then?
So I saw it on VHS, and it was. I just kind of did a little research, and it said it was issued on VHS in '83. So I was probably. I'm pretty sure it would have been either sixth grade or the summer after. Um, and it was a real treat. I was excited about the Ramones, but I probably didn't have all of it yet. I had Into the Century and trying to think if we maybe I think we had Subterranean Jungle that had come out right around then. And when I say we, I mean, this sort of record collection me and my friends were kind of sharing at the
Totally.
time. And but when I saw that film, it made me go out and get like Rocket to Russia and the real classic ones,
Sure.
Road to Ruin. Yeah, so that's actually true because sixth grade. Um, and then what happened was, which was kind of fascinating. I remember getting Road to Ruin, and I really liked it. It was my favorite of the bunch so far,
Sure.
and I got an electric guitar that summer, and some guy I kind of knew was like, Ramones the songs they play are easy. So I didn't even know anything, but my parents signed me up for guitar lessons. And just by dumb luck, um, they signed me up with this guy, Chris Osgood. He was my guitar teacher, and he was in this band
Wait, of the
from the
band?
Suicide Commandos.
No way. He taught lessons?
He taught lessons, and I was a student.
Wow, that's incredible.
And the first day I bought Road to Ruin, I brought it in and I was going to show it to him and say, I want to learn a song off this. And he was like, yeah, man, I love the Ramones. I haven't seen those guys in a while. And I was like, what the, that like, it was like life changing. And all of a sudden, Chris Osgood started telling me all this like cool stuff. And he was talking about, knowing playing, they played, I think the Commandos played a show or two with the Ramones. He was
Yes.
friendly with them in some way.
Because the Suicide Commandos were like ground zero for American punk rock. They started
Yeah.
early and they had a record.
Mm-hmm.
And they Chuck Statler from who did the Devo videos made that "Burn It Down" video. Like,
Yeah.
it was one of the first punk records someone put in my hands when they were like, "Hey, check this out." Buzzcocks, Sex Pistols, Dead Kennedys, and Suicide Commandos was on there. I cannot believe that was your teacher.
So he wasn't just my teacher. Bob Mould took lessons from him, and as did Dave Perner.
I had no idea.
So yeah, and Chris is, remains a friend. I'm not in great touch with him right now, but he's like, continued to be in my life, and he was the coolest guy, and he taught me so much about music and a lot of just being a rock and roll dude. He would he was super cool because he would know things about, well, the Ramones, but the Replacements or whatever. But also he would be like, you got to mind your classic stuff. Like, you got to check out the first ZZ Top records. Like,
Right.
you need to know that, and so he was very influential and actually just like one of the greatest guitar players in my mind of all time. Like, just
That's incredible. Well, what's so funny about the Ramones is it's really hard to pick a band where you have four members that all wrote songs that were so singularly minded in terms of the output. Like, in terms of like, oh, did Tommy write this? Or did Dee Dee write this? Or did Joey or Johnny? It was such a collective, weird, simplistic mind force. I'm still obsessed with it to this day because, you have bands where, like, you have characters in it and everybody brings their own thing. But to have something where they're all like, if you're starting to play music, drums, bass, guitar, or sing, it's a totally easy thing to pick up. None of them were like kind of better than the other person. It's so kind of rare, don't you think?
yeah, I mean, it's like it's cultish in some ways that they all assume the same identity or the, whatever brotherhood or
Right.
however it is, and just that all in the same direction, right? So the other thing I really loved about him is I remember, as I got into punk rock and hardcore and all that, I remember my parents, who were like not super music people, but also not like there was no pushback. Like, I didn't have the kind of parents that were like, you can't listen to that. That
Right.
record can't come in. They didn't care at all about that. And I remember sort of them being kind of into the Ramones because they knew a lot of the songs already. They knew California Sun. They knew Do You Want to Dance?
Right.
All the covers they were doing. And to that, I think that the Ramones were really, one thing I like is sort of when people kind of um nod at maybe a sweeter, more simple America. I mean, Kerouac does that a lot, like, talking about apple pie and baseball games and train whistles and that kind of thing. And the Ramones sort of do that, imply that by doing, kind of having their beachy stuff that this, well, Do You Want to Dance? And some of the kind of even surf, Beach Boys style, Rockaway Beach or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think they nod to that AM radio '60s thing in a way that's comforting while still being, punk.
Yeah, and I think this film is a total throwback too. You know,
Hmm.
it came out in '79, and it has a really weird history about it too. Alan Arkish, who directed it, had worked on some Corman stuff like Death Sport and Hollywood Boulevard, co-written by Joe Dante, who did Gremlins, Matinee, The Howling, and then it just gets weirder. Like the airplane scene where they throw the airplane, the paper airplane, and it goes through. That was shot by the Zucker brothers, who did
Oh,
Airplane.
really?
Yeah, it's just all these people were just getting their start on it, as often happened in Corman's world. I saw this on cable in 1980, and this was my first chance of hearing the Ramones. I'd never heard the Ramones. So you watch the film, and my first Ramones song is PJ Soles singing Rock and Roll High School. It's not even the Ramones, right? You know?
Right.
So I have no context. I also think at 12 years old, this is what high school is going to be like for me. It was so exciting. Oh man, I can be a weirdo new wave kid, and girls are going to fall in love with me, and it's everyone's smoking, in the boys' room, and Paul McCartney songs and are being played on the PA and Cheap Trick. It's so fun because I just had no idea. It was so it seemed like such a dream to me, this film.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um and so I think it's interesting that the film also was originally going to be called Disco High, with Todd
Yeah.
Rundgren starring in it. Then
Hmm.
he said no, and then they went to Cheap Trick, and they said no. And then they went to Devo. They said no. And by this point, Alan, the director, was like, Roger, we got to change it from Disco High. I know it has some rock and roll in it, but it's got to be this. And Danny Fields and Lisa Seymour, I believe, from Sire Records, really were like, you should really look at the Ramones. You should really look at this.
Yeah.
And it happened, and it was a perfect meeting of minds. Like, who else could have done this?
It's funny, as an adult, as I watched it last night, I was sort of struck by, and reading a little bit about it, but you can really see that, like, it was. When I watched it as a kid, the Ramones were front and center, and of course they're a huge part of the movie.
Yeah.
But you sort of see where they're also kind of added in. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
there's a bunch of different versions. In fact, I one of the things that kind of perked my ears up, were like, and in the concert scene, there's a scene where they're coming in and people are looking for drugs, and one guy says, "Who's got the carbona?" And I was like, that was like one of the only things in the script that was kind of knowing to Ramones fans, almost,
Right.
that other than that, you could probably sub out a lot of it.
Oh, yeah. And I guess they were even told, they had to tell them, like, this is how you walk out of the car onto the sidewalk with your guitar. Like, they had to really, like, walk with them and teach them step by step how to do this. They did not naturally know how to lip sync or perform or feel comfortable with it. I guess one of the first things they shot is that amazing shot of them driving in the car singing to the people who are standing in line. Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that's great about this movie. People standing in line to buy tickets. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, did you ever stand in line to buy tickets?
I was gonna ask you. I was gonna ask you. Yeah, I did one overnight. It was for the REM document tour.
Okay.
And it was a great whole thing. We went to a high school party, drank us, like, we had a deal with our friend Cricket. She would drive us sober if we could, and we'd get her a ticket, right?
Right.
So we went to this high school party and drank a bunch of beer, and then the cops came, and she, like, swooped out of nowhere. We got in her car, drove to Dayton's, like a department store that had a Ticketmaster outlet, and basically rolled around, sat on the cold sidewalk,
Yeah.
and sort of half passed out until whatever it was, 7 a.m. or whenever they opened up the Ticketmaster.
How are your seats?
You know what? Totally disappointing considering how early we got
Yes.
served. We got served. It was a lesson in like VIPs. It was like, we got like 15th row, but we got tickets in the first 60 seconds they were on sale.
Yeah, that was the lesson I had too, was like, oh, it doesn't really matter if I'm here at 7 in the morning because they have allotted these tickets in front. And it was so crushing because literally you're like, we are going to be in the first row,
What was the show you were going for?
DEVO. Yeah. New Traditionalists. Did not stay the night, but got there really early. And there was some people that you'd see them in your row later on. You'd be like, oh, these people were there, And there were people there who were scalpers, they were buying up their allotment so that they could sell them later. But mostly, it was funny. My dad was really into going to these shows. So he took me to see the Wings concert when I was 8. Wow. We went on the train up to the Kingdom. I fell asleep halfway through because I was 8 and tired.
Sure.
Wow. Yeah, it's funny. And in fact, one time the first time I ever drank as a teenager and showed up, where your friends drag you and drop you off at your parents and they're like, hey, here's your son. See you later. The next morning, I just wanted to sleep and they're like, get up, get dressed. You're going to see Laurie Anderson in Eugene. I'm like, no, I'm just want to get in the car. You're seeing Laurie Anderson. And I was like, oh, and I was like, it was still my least favorite concert I've ever seen. I hated it. I was like, I was so sick. I couldn't enjoy it.
Right.
It was so funny. So my parents were definitely, they liked to buy tickets. And also they would go see bands if we were underage. They would go see Snakefinger or MX80 Sound and come tell us how the show was, which was, at the time I thought maybe kind of usual, but I realized kind of a rarity.
Were you in Portland? Is that where you grew up?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where these shows were. Wow. Where was like a Snakefinger show?
That was at a club, and so was MX80 Sound, and a club that normally didn't have that kind of band. They usually had like cover bands, but it was over 21. And but yeah, the Ramones and all these bands were playing about a 800 capacity place in Portland, and I was too young to see those $1.92 things. I just missed it by a couple years, but I don't think they were ever like sold out, was what I've heard.
One of the things also when I watched the film last night is that I remember being sort of slightly confused by the scope of the show, meaning I hadn't been to a club yet, so I thought like all concerts were kind of like the STYX concert, and I didn't really understand that like, there were no seats. I mean, I sort of knew that not everything could possibly be an arena show. But I didn't really understand the venue they were playing in. I don't know. Do you know where they filmed that? Was that
it's the Roxy.
That's what I thought.
You've played the Roxy, right? Have you?
I've never played the Roxy.
Okay, I haven't either. I've never been to the Roxy.
I don't think I have either. And disappointingly too, I don't know. This is a real regret, but I never saw the Ramones live.
I never did either. Yeah,
they came. They only came to Minneapolis a few times after I was a fan, and some of it was 21 plus before I was 21. I think I really did actually not go one time just because of whatever, or 20 something drama I had going in my life. Cause I do think they played one time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I really regret that because no matter what lineup it was, I should have gone seen the Ramones.
That's how I feel too. It was a later lineup the last couple times, and it was kind of like at this point, most bands had not been around as long as the Ramones, and so there was a bit of skepticism on my part to be like, oh well, how good that can they be? Then you watch these documentaries, and you're like, they can be pretty fucking great,
Yeah, I think that's probably what it was. Like I would go to things in the entry because it was 200-300 cap, and that just seemed and $7, and that seemed more exciting to me than a band that had been around a long time. And now I really regret that.
Yeah, that's my story too. And I guess when they shot it at the Roxy, they charged people to be in the film. They charged door admission to see
Oh,
the
cool.
Ramones. And so they played at like 7 in the morning, noon, and 5 p.m. doing the same songs that are in the film. But they shot one that they cut. They shot I Want to Be Sedated. That's cut.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first time they shoot them, they're like towards the front of the stage. They're shooting from the back. Second time, they're like on stage. Third time, they have it with the actors involved. And every time they would do a song and reset, they said the directors were like, we thought the audience was going to kill us, because they were like, we paid to see the Ramones, and being a movie, we get it. But like, this is it? They're going to do this song again? And I guess to appease each crowd, they had to convince the Ramones, you got to go out and play some songs.
Yeah.
And the other weird thing is because that's a live track, for the morning show, they went and they recorded a bunch of different versions of the same song. They went in, listened to them, decided which ones were best to play back, to lip sync to match, and have play out. So they were doing things all in one day on the fly. It's kind of amazing that the Ramones, it seems like a real performance. It's a great performance, I think, for something that's so staged.
Yeah. This is the thing. It's a really, growing up by 6th grade, I couldn't drive. I grew up in suburban Minneapolis. And to have just like down at the local video store, a VHS that, so it's something I rented over and over, because you could see a rock and roll performance that was so good. And it's, what it's got, like, I don't know, I wrote it down, probably 6 songs or something.
Mm-hmm.
Do You Want to Dance? The Pinhead, She's the One, Teenage Lobotomy, Blitzkrieg Box, California Sun. So those are all in the concert. And then, you get the car performance of And I Want You Around. Yeah, in the bed. Yeah,
Incredible.
And that's the only place you get that song until later, I guess. I don't know if that's on like Ramones Mania or something, but you couldn't. You only got that song on the VHS for a long time.
I know, and I thought I loved that song. I just thought it was amazing, and I think it's funny. The director Alan, they worked on this film because he fantasized when he was a teenager of having the Yardbirds come to his high school, play, and they would blow up the school. It was like a teenage fantasy for him. And then he just worked it in and slotted different bands in until he could make it happen. And, he also, when they're shooting the bedroom scene with PJ Soles, playing Riff Randall, and she's alone thinking about, Joey in there, like singing to her, and the band's in the shower. And I guess that's, from The Girl Can't Help It. It's from The Girl Can't Help It. They're like referencing that. He just was talking about just that feeling of being alone in your room and music just transporting you, and you fantasizing about, I'm in this band, or I'm at this show, or I'm hanging out with these people, or I live in a castle with these people. And there's just some kind of sweet things in this film that I really feel like that song, for the first time since I'd never heard the Ramones, was a kind of a beautiful, sophisticated song coming from them. It really kind of showed like, oh, they're just not a punk band, I guess.
So was, by the way, Questioningly, which is what they play when she calls into the radio station. They say, like, if you can name this Ramones song. Questioningly off of Road to Ruin is another really beautiful, deep song.
Yeah.
That at a slower tempo. And you know what you're saying about fantasizing about this, I think that rock and roll and punk rock in particular kind of tells a lot of people, a lot of the effect is that there's something else going on out there. I live in Brooklyn. I've lived here since 2000, but I think like when I was a kid and listened to the Ramones, there was some New York stuff, humor or whatever, that I was experiencing for the first time.
Sure.
And and so I was thinking about when they come in on the car and they're just, I just want to have something to do. Right. He says hanging out in 2nd Avenue. Well, I didn't know. Now I know 2nd Avenue pretty well, but also eating chicken vindaloo.
I have that written down. One of my favorite lyrics ever.
And I had a memory that when I was the first time, which is either my late teens, probably, before I ever went to an Indian restaurant, and they handed me the menu, and I ordered the chicken vindaloo because it was the only thing I heard of
Right.
because I knew about it for the Ramones song, and I felt like it was, I might as well. So there was a lot of music said to me that there's something out there that you don't know about yet. And the Ramones in particular did that for me.
Was there anything, because I loved music and I loved reading about music, but it took me some courage to go to an authentic punk show. Like, it took me 3 times to get the courage to walk through the door from hearing what was outside of an all-age club, like Poison Idea playing inside or Sado Nation. And I just was like, I'm going to walk in, they're going to tear my head off. Because I'd seen films like this where they're just bouncing around. Everyone looks older. And I just remember kind of also being excited about the genre, but also wary of being a participant because I was kind of alone. I had, me and my brothers liked it, but I didn't know anyone. I didn't have any friends in school that wanted to listen to this at all. How was it like in terms of you getting into shows in all ages and kind of discovering your way into that?
It was, well, the first 2, it was like, going in the shallow end slowly. But I had some friends that were going to shows and they were talking about them. But the first thing I went to was sort of a starter show, which was the Violent Femmes at First Avenue.
Sure.
So that was the first time I went to a club.
Right.
And so that was like going to a club to me, sort of like going to a club was maybe the bigger hang up at first.
Right.
So then you went to a place that wasn't like a, arena rock concert, and I went in and, but the music wasn't like, insane. And there were a lot of, mellow people, but it's still, there was anxiety going in. And my friend I was going with canceled. And I was like, I'm just doing it. Like, I was kind of like on the high dive. I just got to jump, That's
so funny. I had the same thing. I was alone and I threw the money into the door person's hand and just walked in because I just was like, I got to do this. Tear the bandage off.
I remember walking in and I still have the memory of clove cigarettes. Just like, like those clove cigarettes, the way they smelled, you never smell those anymore. I don't know if anyone smokes them. I don't know if you can buy them.
That's a really good point. It was so omnipresent.
Everyone smoked cloves at those things. The second show I went to, I actually, now that I think about it, I was like, I think I determined that I was kind of an expert after that show. Because what happened was I changed schools after that.
Okay.
And I met new friends. And so, early September, and the Replacements announced they're doing the Tim album release shows at the Entry. And they had some all ages ones at that. And that was the Entry, which was smaller. But I was like, we're going. And to my new friends, and they were all in the Replacements. So like, they were like, yeah, we're going. So we went to that, but I sort of remember spearheading that movement, and the particular thing I do remember about that show, or at least leading up to that show, and this just makes me feel old, but I remember going. There's the show was $4 in advance, $5 at the door.
Yeah.
If I remember right, maybe $5 and $6, one of the two, and we made sure to get advance tickets, not because we were scared it was going to sell out, but we wanted the savings.
Yeah. You're like, that's $1.
Yeah. That's $1,
Yeah. That's like 1/5 of a Meat Puppets record,
Yeah, exactly.
It's like...
Yeah. So then at that point, like, it was almost like I was hooked,
right?
Like, then it was like, oh, I can do this whenever they have one of these shows. I can usually scrape together the money, and it became like a compulsion. I started to go everything I could.
Yeah, me too. And the confidence that came with it. Like, it's so funny. I totally changed. I was so nervous, and I didn't know anyone, and you met people, and, bands were formed from, standing next to someone and being like, yeah, people were spitting at D. Croydon. I thought they were pretty good. Like, what's your name? Like, we're the only 3 people that like this. And just how so many of these shows were also so underattended, were often really funny. You'd be like, oh, I got to get there early. It's going to be crazy. And then it's like, there's like 15 people here to see this hardcore matinee show.
Yeah, there's a lot of them that were tumbleweeds.
Yes.
I was just on my own podcast. I had a Linda Segarra, who has Hooray for the Riffraff, and I was talking to them about it, and I was saying I think one of the unspoken or underrepresented things about punk rock is the ability that it allows you to meet people who aren't from your high school. Because it was
Absolutely.
like it opened up the city to me, really, you know?
Yeah, me too. I totally am so thankful that I was the age I was, and that I got brave enough to go inside.
Yeah.
Well, you just watched this film recently. It's got, like Clint Howard in it. It's got Vince Van Patton in it. It's got, it's got Mary Warnov from Velvet Underground dancing, whipping people on stage, and Paul Bartel, who together, they did Eating Raoul. But like, does this film hold up to you as like a cult Roger Corman kind of plotline thing? Do you find entertainment in it still?
I thought it was so fun. I mean, I thought that it was just like a blast. And there's just like, I mean, like the surreal part when they go into the bathroom smoking in the boys' room, and he steps into the office of Clint Howard's character, Eagle Bauer. And, he sort of does, pulls out the charts, fake IDs are going down, like there's these great surreal campy moments. And also I just love like, so much of the films I loved from the 80s are kind of like, there's this like, well, the adults are all idiots. Let me tell you something. The adults don't listen to them, and that's
the
E.T.
enemy.
Even. Yeah, I mean, they're the enemy. Like I always think about E.T., they find an alien. The first thing is like, don't tell any adults, Goonies is like that too, right? I mean, like we can't. And so I love that sort of that thing. I thought it was so fun. And I just think it's got a great ending. I love still the line that kills me, like laugh out loud, is when Principal Togar says, "Do your parents know you're the Ramones?" It's just that's all so great, and the concert scene's as good as you get in a film. The one thing I wrote down that I just wanted to bring up because I loved it so much, and especially as we just talked about the Violent Femmes. And there's that Violent Femmes song where he says, like, I hope this will go down on your permanent record. And they talk a lot about permanent record in Rock and Roll High School.
Absolutely.
And I think that permanent record was something we talked about in the 70s and 80s, that maybe like with the internet, it doesn't go on, but there was always this looming thread of your permanent record.
Yes. Counselors, like what is your, career counselors. I remember I had to do in high school a mock interview. I even had a class that had a mock wedding in it that was about marriage and finance. I mean, that's where we were. And it was like, I was the DJ, duh. But, like everyone else was like, who was the bride and groom? It was like, the beautiful people. And it was like, what is going on here? There was a definite disconnect in terms of like kind of a threat of like, okay, we're controlling your future here still.
And we're keeping track of you. That's like and at the end, that's kind of the climax, is when they get in the building and they start chainsawing the permanent records and throwing them out the window. Like it's like a fresh start. Very beautiful.
Paul Bartel's like tearing his clothes off and stuff, and they're dancing around to songs. Also, this was the first time that I'd ever heard MC5 or Brian Eno, the Velvet Underground, have a track in it. So it definitely led me on a path to be like, like who does that high school song that's not on the soundtrack? It took me forever.
I thought about that too, because I'm not even sure I knew that was the MC5. But, I always had this experience with the MC5 that is laughable today, where because it's one of my favorite bands. But like people like Chris Osgood would say, you got to check out the MC5. Like you got to. And literally for like 3-4 years, I would walk into a record store and I'd go to the M section and sadly flip through it. You couldn't find those records back then. They were out of print. They were out of print. I could never find them. The first time I ever really heard MC5 is when they reissued Kick Out the Jams.
Right.
I could never put my hand on an MC5 record. And but I sadly looked for them for years. Like in the most like, okay, am I doing it to myself again? But they just never turned up used, and they were gone new by that point.
That makes sense. Mine was, someone gave it to me on a mixtape. I remember it was like 89, back in Portland from college and living in a house with like 18 people. And you're playing Mudhoney's single and somebody knocks on the door and they're like, "Oh yeah, have you heard the MC5 and the Stooges?" I'm like, "Heard them, but not really." And then they're like, "Here." And they had them, It was just one of those things. And I was like, I felt like such a dope. I thought like Mudhoney and Tad were like reinvented, like made this new thing, out of punk rock. And I was like, oh, sure. Shit. Okay. But those are glorious moments. I can totally picture the way the sun was when I heard those records, and, where, what was going on in my life at the time. And again, music's time travel. And this film, takes me back too. But I agree. I think it's a really fun, dumb film. It doesn't overstay its welcome between, scenes. They're in, they're out. Usually in films like this, by the second, the last third, you're like, all right, like, it's kind of, we need to wrap this up. But they smartly start throwing the Ramones more and more at the end.
Well, it's almost like a 60-minute film with a 30-minute Ramones concert, yes. And I think that's what saves it, or that's what, makes it an A+, because it doesn't have to have that terrible third act.
Yes. And Roger Corman wanted to cut out the middle of every Ramones song in this movie to make it shorter. And they're like, these songs are short. Like, right. What? But he was just like, yeah, there's too much music in this. And it's just incredible that they were like, just let's make it. Let's just edit it, and then let's just put it out. Roger won't know. But it's kind of amazing to think that Roger Corman was still saying that. And I didn't even know do you know there's a sequel to this film?
Yeah, I maybe I was vaguely aware of it. And then I looked it up. It's a really interesting directorial choice in the film is when they're doing teenage lobotomy. I don't know if you remember this, but like the words just start flashing up. Lobotomy. And is that so what like I don't know why they did that.
I listened to an interview with them, and they just thought it was funny. They're like, "Why these lyrics are so dumb? Let's put them on the screen. Like they're not smart enough to hear what they're saying." So it was like kind of like they're being tongue in cheek about it. But I remember it coming out of nowhere, and it just being I thought it was such a cool stylistic choice. Like the font, the way it gets bigger and bigger. And, there were some things I guess the Ramones weren't into. Like Joey Ramone was not into the fisheye lens on I Don't Want to Be a Pinhead No More on Pinhead. Mm-hmm. Like it's really close and he looks really, elongated. He was really bummed out about that. But I kind of like those things where it's just like, it kind of breaks up it's like 12 minutes, 10-minute performance, and like they're breaking it up with all this stylistic stuff. I think it's pretty fun. I also love the scene where they finally get to meet the Ramones and see their eating habits. And, it's like people always, when they think of this movie, I think they think of that scene and Dee Dee delivering his one line. When I saw it when I was young, one of the things I loved about it was I just thought it was amazing that the Ramones had such a sense of humor. I didn't know who these people were, but the fact that they're like shoving wheat germ and riboflavin into this singer's mouth, and he's playing along with it, and they all, I don't know, they just seemed like cool people, like they're just having fun and they're playing into it. I had no idea who these people were, right? But I just think that, like, I can't imagine, like DEVO would have been cool, but it just would have been too cold. Cheap Trick, it would have been like quirky but a little too beautiful, and it would have been interesting.
I think that the thing I was talking about, that Americanness of the Ramones, the sort of 50s 60s nod of their music makes them the perfect thing for this, because it is sort of a sock hop kind of thing.
Yeah, at the end they said when they're pushing through the high school on like the drum risers moving through and they're dancing down the hall. They're like, we want this to be like an MGM musical, like at the end, we've got pom poms and we've got like a marching band and we got, football players. It's like so American. And that always frustrated me a little bit as a kid because I'd be like, that football player would not listen to the Ramones. That guy would have shoved me in the locker for liking the Ramones.
But that's what makes it kind of utopian as a film. And I also do remember, like, I would rent it repeatedly from the video store when I was a kid. And I remember my younger sister who's 5 years younger. So if I was, 14 and she was 9, I remember her watching it and loving it. And, talking about she loved Riff Randall. I don't know, she liked the Ramones too, but like, it worked on several levels. And I think that MGM musical quality at the end is one of the things that makes it so fun.
Yeah, it's super sweet. And, and then they get to blow up the school. What
Yeah.
could be better? So I have some questions for you about lyrics and the Ramones.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what lyric of the Ramones do you wish you would have written? And is there a lyric you've ever written that you feel like would be perfect to hear out of the Ramones' mouth?
Wow. I mean, there's very many. I'm just trying to think of like, oh, well, I think, to me, and as we said earlier, I think some of my favorite Ramones songs are the slower ones. And I think that I Want to Be Your Boyfriend is possibly the most romantic song I know. Girl, I Want to Be Your Boyfriend. That's just like so sweet to me, in a way that it harkens back to another. I'm a little bit of I'm kind of a sap when it comes to that kind of, and there's something that makes me feel like very romantic, like that same thing I've been saying this whole time, taking your girl to the dance, that kind of thing.
Yes.
um as far as writing a lyric, there might be like um it might go back to Lift Your Puller, my first band. There's a song Space Open that I say, what do you think my girl wants? And I think I think that's maybe, Joey Ramone talks about his girl, kind of like, there's something like there's something kind of funny about that to me. Like, what do you think my girl wants? So that might be my Ramones lyric.
Love it. If you could have been on any Ramones record, what record would you want to have been part of?
Road to Ruin. And I already know my part because Joey is singing, obviously, so I'm not going to be the singer. So, but there's some overdubs. There's some guitar overdubs on that record, and I think it's maybe the first Ramones record, at least I think chronologically, that had some of those. Like, there's like a thing, and I just want something to do. Like, so I could see myself, playing the second guitar. It's not above my ability, but it's still like, it's still not the total downstrokes that Johnny's doing. So that's where I can see myself slot into it.
Roger Corman's coming to you. He says, hey, we want to make a Hold Steady movie in the spirit of these other films I've made. Do you have anything in mind, like a title, a little plot line? Like, what kind of film would a Hold Steady Roger Corman film hold for the audience?
Well, it would be set in the Twin Cities, I think, obviously, and it would somehow culminate down at the Mississippi River. I think that you'd have to, but I think it would have to be a little, I don't know, a little dark. There would have to be like, maybe there's a cult, maybe there's like a Children of the Corn kind of thing happening down at the Mississippi River. And, one guy has to, it's kind of like, it's got a sort of a Springsteen thing, like he's got to do it tonight or he can't, or it's never going to be the same. And he's got to, we got one chance to bust it out, but first we got to defeat the cult down by the Mississippi River. Something like that.
And Roger Corman would probably want a few cars to drive through a few houses or something to bust things up.
Oh yeah. You're gonna go off the bridge into the river at least once. I think,
Yes.
I mean, a car is gonna end up, at least one car is gonna end up in the Mississippi, maybe a truck.
And who is Clint Howard going to play in this film?
Clint Howard. Wow. I think Clint Howard, I think, there's maybe the Clint Howard is sort of, in Taxi Driver when he goes to the weapons dealer. I feel like
Yes.
Clint Howard might be the guy who outfits him with with the tools of destruction.
Yeah, with the Eagle Bauer kindness, like, oh, here, let me show you here.
Yeah.
It's like just all very sweet, not as spooky. Oh, I love it.
Yeah, I'm seeing it now. He meets him in in a warming house, like when they freeze over the lakes for the hockey games. They have the warming house. Like it's like the warming house. You go in there, Eagle Bauer shuts it down and pulls out the weapons.
It has to be Eagle Bauer Sr. It just has to be him.
Yeah,
Just still, wow. This has been super fun, Craig. I really appreciate it. It's
I
fun.
appreciate it. I love it. Made me really really love that movie and just was it just a sweet chance to go back and understand like how important it was to me, but just how fun it is and how much the Ramones mean to me and sort of like my development as a person, really, but especially as a rock and roll fan.
Yeah, I mean, this film is over 40 years old and it still feels kind of weirdly fresh and unique, and it's entertaining. It does melt my heart.
Well, the people in charge are still idiots, so that's the
Yes.
timeless thing,
Well, at the end of every interview, I ask the same question, but I tailor it depending on the film we're talking about. So on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest, how many empty pizza boxes eaten by the Ramones do you give this film? And how many fistfuls of wheat germ do you give to Joey on a scale from 1 to 10?
I may be an easy grader, but I'm going to give 10 to each because it's just brought me so much joy, and I don't think taking anything away. Although I get the feeling Joey would appreciate less than 10 fistfuls of wheat germ. If it means a good thing, I'm giving them all 10.
That's great. That's the correct answer. I have 10 for both here. Thank you so much, Craig. This has been brilliant. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was super fun. Thanks for having me.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you, man. Take care, Chris. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Revolutions Per Movie. We release new episodes every Thursday on your favorite podcast app and additional bonus episodes every Sunday on our Patreon. The show is a completely independent affair, so the best way to support the show is through our Patreon at patreon.com/revolutionspermovie, where you can get weekly bonus episodes and shows, exclusive limited edition flexi discs and records and CDs featuring guests that have appeared on the show, and other exclusive goods sent to you just for joining. You can follow us on social media at Revolutions Per Movie and also find out more information about our various guests in the episode show notes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. Bye!